Hello. Welcome back to Module 1, Introduction to Government. Today, we will go over Section 2, Forms of Governance. In this video, we will take what you learned in the last video and further develop your understanding of the various systems that shaped the American political experiment. We left off last time with Polybius. He was a Greek nobleman and soldier born about 100 years after Aristotle died. In 167 BCE, he was taken to Rome as a hostage during the Roman subjugation of Greece. As an expatriate in Rome's high society, he sought to understand how his homeland, once the glory of the Mediterranean, could become a client state of another power. His account of Rome's rise to supremacy contains one of the most famous and detailed descriptions of how governments rise and fall. He characterized the process as a cycle, the cycle of constitutional change, or, in the Greek, anacyclosis. He theorized that the three forms of government we have discussed were not only subject to corruption, but they also yielded to the next as they decayed in a natural process. He wrote, "Kingship changes into its congenital vice, that is, into tyranny, and then it is the turn of aristocracy after the dissolution of tyranny. Aristocracy necessarily degenerates into oligarchy, and when the general populace get impassioned enough to seek redress for the crimes committed by their leaders, democracy is born. And in due course, once democracy turns to violating and breaking the law, mob rule arises and completes the series. In other words, self-satisfied kings are overthrown by restless nobles, and aristocracy comes into power." Predating Polybius, Aristotle wrote, "Tyranny is monarchy with a view to the advantage of the monarch. Despite their intentions, even the best of men can grow corrupt, and principled noblemen become self-interested elites." Aristotle continued, "Oligarchy rule with a view to the advantage for the well-off. When oligarchs abuse their authority to an intolerable degree, the people rise up and take control. But a democracy can be easily swayed by greed and class rivalry and turn to mob rule, the oppressive fight for majority dominance. This chaos creates a power vacuum into which steps a strongman to restore order. The strongman declares himself king, and the cycle begins once more. The main driver of this recurring change is hubris, or extreme pride and exaggerated self-confidence. Plato noted that human nature is not at all capable of regulating the human things when it possesses autocratic authority over everything, without becoming swollen with insolence and injustice. Polybius has not been absolutely correct over the millennia, but one can still see a general repeating pattern of anacyclosis throughout history. The Roman Republic replaced an earlier monarchy in the 6th century BCE and might have been the one to break Polybius's cycle, but it too fell victim to forces greater than itself. A brief definition of a republic is that it is a mixed system that combines elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. The word comes from the Greek word politia, which was then translated into the Latin res publica, meaning the public affairs. Roman society in the Republic was originally comprised of the patricians, the landed nobility who managed the day-to-day business of government, and the plebeians, the non-aristocratic common people. The Roman constitution structured offices of consuls, senate, and tribunes in a system of checks and balances. Two patrician magistrates known as consuls shared imperium, the decisive power of a king, by presiding over the senate and commanding military forces in the field. To keep them from ruling absolutely, consuls were elected annually and served their term concurrently. Additionally, each could veto the decision of the other. Other patricians held executive offices responsible for overseeing the state treasury, supplying troops in the field, maintaining public properties, furnishing the city's water and food resources, settling civil disputes, and managing public festivals. The authority of these magistrates was further balanced by the Senate, who were also patricians and responsible for overseeing public finance, foreign policy, and civil administration. The word Senate comes from the Latin senex, meaning old man, and this deliberative body in Rome were the elder statesmen of the Republic. The power of these aristocratic elites was further offset by the popular assemblies comprised of plebeians. Decisions debated by the Senate had to be confirmed by the assemblies, who approved laws, elected the magistrates and tribunes, and declared war. This system of checks and balances was encapsulated in the phrase Senatus Populusque Romanus, or the Senate and people of Rome. Romans in the Republic era had a profound dislike for kings, but they also realized that, in times of extreme emergency, a single leader might be essential. In these rare instances, a consul or another respected citizen could be named dictator and granted with imperium to see the state through the crisis. These men could only serve for 6 months or the duration of the emergency, whichever was the shortest amount of time. The 12 Tables established written laws that applied to all citizens, creating legal transparency. This system was complex and saw a great deal of revision, but, for 400 years, it kept civil order inside the Roman state. The Roman historian Titus Livy remarked on how fortunate Rome was to escape the cycle of constitutional change, and on the favorable timing as the Romans, bound together by a long history of community and a slow schooling in good laws, were ready to govern themselves. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the Roman statesman and orator, wrote in De Legibus, or, in English, the laws, the safety of the people shall be the highest law. He emphasized the primacy of public welfare and advocated for governance guided by justice and moral responsibility rather than self-interest. However, even republics are capable of hubris and can fall victim to class resentment. Despite the sharing of power, the aristocracy exerted a higher degree of authority in Roman society. In what has become known as the conflict of the orders, patricians and plebeians contended for the levers of power. As one remedy, the office of the tribune of the plebs was created to offer the common people more influence in Rome's politics. Plato had earlier seen that massive inequality of wealth threatened the peace of a city. There are 2 cities really, warring with each other, one city of the poor, another of the rich. There are several reasons for the failure of the Roman Republic, but one major factor was the unequal and immoral distribution of land in Rome's conquered territories. The dispute ultimately resulted in violence, and, with Romans having spilled their fellow citizens' blood, the next 100 chaotic years saw the gradual end of the Republic and the emergence of the Roman Empire. Representative democracy is a type of democracy where elected representatives make decisions on behalf of citizens. There are several examples of representative democracies in the world, but the one most relevant to the origins of the American founding is the British parliamentary constitutional monarchy. On the eve of the American Revolution, the British Empire was jointly managed by the King and Parliament. King James I of England informed his subjects in 1609 that the state of monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth, for kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth, and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself they are called gods. This idea of the divine right of kings had deep roots in the medieval age and led to European monarchs ruling as the ultimate power in their realms. John Neville Figgis wrote, "This authority is founded upon the notion that because it can make laws, it is above law." Robert Filmer, the English political theorist, epitomized this viewpoint, writing in the early 1600s, "To majesty or sovereignty belongeth an absolute power not subject to any law." British philosopher John Locke would strenuously disagree with Filmer, and we will hear from Locke again in Module 2. Absolute monarchy in the British Isles diminished after the English Civil War, which was fought from 1642 to 1651, and the Whig settlement of the Glorious Revolution in 1688 and 1689. By the early 18th century, the Crown began to exert less direct control over the affairs of state. Instead, the king wielded influence through patronage and shared sovereignty. The king approved legislation before it became an act of parliament, and, thus, British law. All statute law was said to be enacted by the king in parliament. Legislative power is held by Parliament, which is divided into the House of Lords, the members of which serve for life by virtue of inherited titles of nobility, and the House of Commons, which was comprised of property-owning gentry who were elected to office. Although technically the lower house, the Commons held the reins of power, including legislation and taxation, by the late 17th century. Daily management of the government was overseen by the king's ministers, who were selected from among the political factions in Parliament. By the time of the American Revolution, the two political parties dominating Parliament were the Royalist Tories and the Parliamentarian Whigs. As part of parliamentary sovereignty, the leader of the prevailing party within the Commons was the leader of the government in the role of Prime Minister. Other ministers controlled specific bureaucracies such as Privy Council, Chancellor, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Board of Trade. Next time, this brings Module 1 to a close. In the next video, we will move on to Module 2, Principles of the American Republic, where we will examine the ideas and philosophies that inspire the American system of government. Until then, thank you for your time. If you want to learn more about the subjects we have discussed, here are the sources used for this section.